Well, hi there. This is Rick Austin again, coming right at you from northern Minnesota. I'm going to talk to you today about, can a Satanist be forgiven? Well, that's an interesting question. I'm about to tell you the answer through a series of mumblings. So here we go. So there's a thought out there that, and this is obvious, there are a lot of different Christian denominations, okay? And some people don't consider themselves a denomination, including Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and Greek Orthodoxy. Okay. Now, what are the original teachings of Christ? Does it matter? It does matter, doesn't it? As most, if not everyone, adores Christ, even from a distance, if they really realize that there is even a possibility that there is a loving God out there, and that Christ could be his son, coming down in a virgin birth to visit us here on planet Earth. So, let's talk a little bit about church history. Early church was Orthodoxy, from what I understand and what I've come to believe. And Catholicism came out of Orthodoxy, which was a split out of Orthodoxy by the rogue Roman patriarch, or there was five original patriarchs, and the Roman patriarch went rogue and decided to say whatever he says goes, and the other four continued to vote on major issues within the church as a whole. Now, one thing you need to understand about Christian doctrine is the original church, the early church, which still exists today, Greek Orthodoxy, Greek and Russian Orthodoxy in a nutshell, believes that any concrete doctrine of the church has to be accepted by all, in other words, the whole church, or the majority, not just the patriarchs. But there's always councils, and the councils are the deciding factor. Although the Roman patriarchs split off and started Roman Catholicism, apart and away from Greek Orthodoxy, same as Russian Orthodoxy, or Romanian or Serbian, etc. And the Protestant Reformation split away from Roman Catholicism, and Anglicans split away from Roman Catholicism separately from the Protestant Reformation. But since there was a split originally from the church by the rogue bishop, or the Roman patriarch, there has been many splinter churches since then, diluting and hereticizing, or making the gospel heretical, which not every person that encounters Christianity encounters the early church, or Greek Orthodoxy, the original teachings of Christ, and apostolic succession, which is what's accepted by all, the whole church, or the majority, and concluded or voted upon by the four patriarchs. Obviously, there's a more hierarchy than the four patriarchs. So what I'm saying is that when someone discovers Christianity from a muddied view, it's distasteful, like eating mud. and they turn away from Christ instead of towards Christ. And a lot of times they turn to atheism, and atheism leads to Satanism. Okay? Because who would want to serve a God that says, by the way, you were born guilty and it's all your fault and you have to grovel for mercy the rest of your life? That is not the true gospel, which is what is preached by the majority of Christianity and not the early church. The early church teaches that God is a loving Father that is helping us learn to walk and run and dance, and when Christ returns, to fly and meet Christ in the air and come down with the New Jerusalem with him. So what I'm saying here is that it is not necessarily always the Satanist's fault that they choose atheism and then Satanism, because they've experienced the wrong side of Christianity and not the early teachings of Christ, which is much more beautiful and poetic and loving. An Orthodox man, well, he was not Orthodox at first, but when he discovered Orthodoxy, he discovered Orthodoxy by afterlife, after death experience. And when he saw Christ, Christ was tending sheep in a field in heaven, not judging him on a throne, pointing his finger condescendingly. Yes, Christ is infinitely condescending, but he's also infinitely humble. You understand? Christ is omnipresent, omnipowerful. He's everywhere, all-powerful, all-knowing, and he's infinitely greater than us, so he's infinitely condescending, but he's also infinitely humble. So when someone hears that we are born guilty and it's all our fault and we have to grovel for mercy the rest of our lives, that is not the gospel. The gospel is a loving Father who brings healing. He's the great physician. He brings healing, and he helps us up when we stumble, because he's teaching us to walk and to run, to talk, to sing, to dance, and so on and so forth. You understand? Okay. Now, I don't suggest trying to fly without wings before Christ's return, obviously, and don't think that Christ's return is before it actually is. Let Christ make you fly. Don't try to fly by yourself. My point is, be sane, okay? And at the same time, know that anyone on planet Earth, and this is an Orthodox teaching, that we can, as long as we're still breathing, we can always turn back to God and be forgiven. Now, we shouldn't play with God's mercy, and if we're in the practice of known sin and we die, then there's great judgment for us. But if we're doing our best to serve God and we stumble, God is gracious with us and wants to help us back up. At the same time, if you're fed a muddied gospel or an inappropriate gospel, that's all you've ever heard of Christianity, that's not your fault, you see. So yes, a Satanist can be forgiven. And to my knowledge, Satanists practice, well, let me tell you this. The Apostle Paul himself writes in the letters that before he met Christ and fell off his horse by the blinding light on the road to Damascus, he was a blasphemer because he was speaking against Christianity, the work of the Holy Spirit. And it says in that same passage, it says, but, Paul's speaking, but I was forgiven because of my ignorance. So you understand this. Yes, Satanists can be forgiven because of their ignorance, because of a incomplete or incorrect gospel that they've been fed by the brokenness of what has become numerous splinter churches far, far away from what is today the early church, Greek or Russian Orthodoxy, or Romanian or Serbian Orthodoxy, being the early church, or the true teachings of Christ, the original teachings of Christ, if you look at church history. This is your answer. Yes, Satanists can be forgiven. This is Rick Austin signing off. Thanks so much. Take care.